Hello everyone, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode here at the Aquarium Project. As usual, we really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy days to see what I have to say about fish, because we all love fish. But yeah, that's my little introduction for you, and let's get straight into today's topic, shall we? For today's episode, we're going to be talking about these bad boys. Plants. The main topic is what things should you consider, what things do you need to do if you're looking to add aquarium plants to your aquarium for the first time. Maybe you've been keeping, your fish tank and you've just had, some hardscape, we call it, so like rocks and driftwood and that, or you've had some ornaments, or you've had nothing at all, and you've seen online how cool aquariums with live, real plants look, and you're just wanting to know what would be the best first steps to take if this is something that you're wanting to do and you're wanting to replicate in your home aquarium. So there is a few things to take note of, and I'm kind of just going to go through some of the basics so that you have the best chance to be set up to enable yourself to enjoy an aquarium with live plants that you like. So the first thing I'm going to say is make sure you're sourcing the right plants for your aquarium. And what do I mean when I say sourcing the right plants for your aquarium? A lot of the plants that are available in commercially, at least, and not just in New Zealand, I'm aware of this problem all over the world, are grown what we call immersed. So immersed plants are grown in big greenhouses, basically, that is really super humid, and the plants are grown out of water in this high humidity. The reason for this is when the plants are grown in that kind of environment, they basically have access to an unlimited supply of CO2 in the atmosphere. Because unfortunately, not really related, but we humans love putting CO2 in the atmosphere, so at least the plants can benefit from that and they can use that. So basically what that means is if the plants form in these greenhouses, what we call immersed leaves, and they can't deal with being underwater or submerged. So what will happen usually is when you put this plant in the water, all the leaves are going to basically fall off and die and get all gross and shrivel up, and that's the end of that. And that's a shame, because a lot of people will kind of just see that and not knowing any better think that their plant's dead and just try to get rid of it while they still can. And I mean, I really get that sentiment, and I don't think that's good, and I don't think, especially if you're not aware, it sucks. So what I always try to recommend is getting what we call submerged grown plants. So that's plants that are grown underwater, just because they're going to give you the best chance of success not long term, but like short term, because like I know it's kind of, the whole instant gratification thing gets a bit of a bad rep, but it's, especially if you're trying something new, not even having success, but just not failing straight away is going to go a long way in helping you sort of keep it up. So yeah, that's why I think submerged grown is probably the best option. The other thing to probably consider is like the types of plants that you're doing. So I would recommend, like, obviously you want to stick with easy to grow plants. So things like this ambulia here, which is this fluffier kind of looking one, the rotundifolia here, or like crypts or sword plants, they're generally going to be your best options. I know I do like to recommend things like the Anubias and the Java moss and that, and yes, that is definitely a good option. The only thing is, because they are quite slow growing, it's hard to see any progress with them as they grow, just because they don't really grow very fast. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant to recommend those. But they are pretty bulletproof, like they're not going to die or, shrivel up or anything as what other things are. So I think they are good options, but just exercise caution with them. In general, I guess. The next thing I'm going to say is probably quite controversial, but I think for the people that are the kind of people who will be watching this video, I think this is going to work, and that is, at least for the first month or so, don't worry about liquid fertilizers. I see a lot of people who chuck live plants in and then go all out on the Seek and Flourish, for example, and it doesn't work. And all that happens is they grow heaps of algae, and they're like, oh yeah, I've added the plants, and plants create algae. But that just simply is not the case. The best part, sort of explanation I have for that is when you first move a plant, it's not going to grow that fast. It's got to grow its roots out and establish itself and like essentially like calm down from the trauma of, in quotation marks, of shifting. And so you've got to give it some time. So I wouldn't worry about using the liquid fertilizers, like fertilizers you add to the water column, for the first month or so. What you can do, if you're doing things that feed from the roots, so things like crypts or sword plants, I would just chuck like a root tab in with them, because that's basically going to be like a slow release kind of thing, and just very basically it will get used as it is needed. So that's kind of the best way to ensure that you're not going to have a massive outgrowth or explosion of algae in that, and that your plants are actually going to create a nice aesthetic environment that you're actually going to enjoy, which is why we're doing all this. The next thing that you will want to do is, like, after maybe a month or so, you can start adding those liquid fertilizers if you want, but not like, don't go crazy on them. Just like maybe, start with like a third the dose that is recommended and build it up, because not having enough fertilizers is a much easier challenge to deal with than like overdoing it and dealing with an algae explosion. I know, again, this advice is not going to be popular with like the aquascaping purists and that, but that's not really, we're not trying to make massive, ADA type aquascapes. We're just trying to have people enjoying the plants here. So I think that would be the best option to start with, and then kind of creeping it up. I would also say patience is very important. Patience is so important with plants, because nothing is going to happen fast. It is going to take some time for it all to grow. I wouldn't get discouraged, but just remember that you're not expecting anything to happen too quickly, because simply put, nothing worthwhile happens fast, or whatever they say. So yeah, the next thing I'm going to say is often when you buy plants, you'll be buying what they call bunched plants. And so that's ones like with a little ring of like a piece of metal that's lead that wraps them up around, and oftentimes people will just end up chucking the whole bundle in and like letting that sink to the bottom, and that's fine. But what's going to happen is that the plant is going to get kind of constricted by that and not be able to fully grow to its fullest potential. So I always recommend removing that ring and then burying the bottom of the plant underneath the gravel or the substrate, because that's going to allow the plant to naturally root and naturally kind of grow in that medium of the substrate, if you will. So the other thing with substrate as well, make sure you have a deep enough substrate. Like a lot of times you see people and it's like, one or two gravel width is wide, and that's fine. Like it'll look nice, it'll be easy to clean, but plants really need deep gravel bed. Like now for me, if I'm setting up a planted tank, like a planted aquarium, I personally wouldn't do any more shallow than this, which is like maybe like 10 centimeters or something like that. Like maybe like that deep. Obviously there is a scale, so like if you've got a smaller tank, it doesn't need to be as deep. But you'll definitely want, I wouldn't do, no matter what, I wouldn't do anything lower than 5 centimeters, no matter what the tank. Because when you first put the plant in, if there's not enough gravel, it's just going to keep floating to the top, and that's going to not let it root, and then it's not going to be able to grow. So making sure you've got a deep enough substrate for the plants to grow in is, I think, one of the more underrated and more often forgot about things that I find really does make quite a big difference in terms of the actual growth of the plants themselves and the ease at which they do grow. So yeah, I think today that is pretty much it for me. I think that's a good overview of the kind of the very, very basics that you might need to know if you're looking to take your first little steps into the planted aquarium world. And then obviously you can go further and further and further and enter aquascaping competitions and that if you like. But this will give you a good starting point of like some of the very basics, answering some of the very basic questions that we get here in the shop to hopefully set you guys up with a good base. So I just want to say thank you guys very much for watching. I really appreciate the support. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.